again, everybody. It is time for the Silver Bullets podcast. We're back. I'm Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnick.
Chip, it's been a while since we talked. This is only our second episode since joining Buckeye Scoop, and we're extremely happy to be among such esteemed company. And but you know, we're now in October, and the season's getting ready to start. So it's time for us to come out of hibernation and shake off the dust and, yawn, stretch a little bit, and get ready for some football.
I'm excited that we are able to talk about football finally.
Yeah, this has been, 2020 has just been a bizarre year in every aspect, but from a college football aspect especially, you thought, well, maybe we'll have some kind of handle on this thing by the fall when the pandemic kind of hit back in the late winter / early spring, and it didn't. I think is a good way to put it. It's something like this requires, I think, a little bit more sacrifice than a lot of people are willing to make, and as a result, we are where we are. I don't know how. I haven't been keeping up with the numbers in Ohio, but I know we're still several thousand new infections a day here in Florida. 100 people dying every day, and we're going to have football, and we've had some football. We've seen some teams have to postpone some games due to some positive COVID tests, and some teams are going on with limited rosters at times. But this is 2020, and this is going to as good as it's going to get. We had a schedule released, then we had an announcement just days later that there wasn't going to be a season, and not till they were going to try to do it, after the first of the year, sometime maybe in the spring. It was kind of an ill-conceived plan. We talked about this, I think, on our last show. I might be wrong, but we saw that there was like, well, why are you doing this now? Why don't you just because even by their own admission, Kevin Warren, Big Ten commissioner, even by his own admission, things are changing rapidly, and they changed rapidly since last week. So now we have to, postpone the season. They didn't use the word cancel, but it amounted to the same thing. And then, the best case right there would have been just do nothing, see what happens, and then if you have to push it, you push it later.
Yeah, I mean I'm sure you're familiar with like the whole ESPN 30 for 30 series, and someday, probably not for a while, and I hopefully with 2020 in the distant rearview mirror, the 30 for 30 on the deliberations of what the Big Ten was doing and wasn't doing. That's going to make for, it might be on ESPN, it might be on Big Ten Network, whatever. But it's what someday, somehow, we're going to find out what was going on. I'm completely in the camp that you are, that it never really made any sense to me why the schedule was released only to have it canceled 5 days later, when, in all fairness, they could have made the announcement 5 days after that we're going to have to postpone the season, as the concerns over the coronavirus for anyone who's listening. I think you would agree that, I'm speaking to you from Ohio. You asked about the coronavirus. It is, there are increases in cases up here, as well as down in Florida. So, for all the people that, it's not that big of a deal, or yes, it is a big of a deal, my answer, in agreement with you, is what would have made so much more sense, instead of all of the frustration and anger and disappointment that not only, you and I had as fans, but more importantly, like the players, the coaches, that everything that they went through, that could have just been so much better handled. And I just think I'm grateful for the fact that it's back, that we're going to have football here sooner rather than later. But it just seems like there was a lot of missed opportunity to do the right thing, and hopefully there's been some lessons learned along the way.
To me, it just seemed like, I mean, in retrospect, it seems to me that this was the Big Ten saying, well, everybody's going to cancel, so we're going to get out in front of it and be first and be the leaders, and then it backfired on them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, they probably thought, kind of not nearly as humorous as a result, but like Will Ferrell, in Old School, we're going streaking, everybody's doing it, kind of, no, they aren't, and unfortunately the Big Ten, they just came out looking rather foolish for, making, with all of the protests and all of the, everything that happened. Like I said, it could have been just handled so much better. Kevin Warren, they say that there's an old saying that, like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think he, like you said, I think he thought that people would jump lockstep with the Big Ten. It was a fatal miscalculation, almost fatal miscalculation, in the sense that, we were almost deprived of Big Ten football. But like I said a few moments ago, it's closer now than it certainly seemed, back, about a month ago. So I'm just grateful that we're progressing in the right direction.
Yeah, it was a little bit crazy. Then the parents and the students, the student athletes got involved, and they did some independent research. Famously, there was a lawsuit from Nebraska players. There was a lot of demonstrations and things like that happened, and then you started to feel that there was a groundswell of support for playing, given the fact that that the SEC, the ACC, Big 12 were going to continue no matter what. It didn't seem like it was something that if they could do it safely or figure out a way to do it or at least attempt it, why were Big 10 and Pac-12 schools not given that same opportunity? There were, famously a lot of people pointed to the fact that, University of Cincinnati was going to be playing, the Bengals were going to be playing, the Browns were going to be playing, and a lot of high schools were going to be playing. And if that's the case, then it seems silly that the Big Ten can't at least try to put together a season.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely one of those frustrating areas that I can only speak from the Ohio high school experience, and this is not meant to sound condescending or critical of anyone who might be listening to this from another area. Like I know you're in Florida, so at least for Ohio high school around our area, that if somebody wants to go to a high school game, you have to be either the like the parent of a player on the team or a parent of a player on the opposing team, or a parent of a child who is in like the marching band or a cheerleader, but there are no visiting cheerleaders. There are no visiting marching bands, to the best of my knowledge. And a lot of people around the Ohio area aren't happy with it. But the way I look at it, it's like, okay, if this is what it takes in order to have some kind of participation or audience, I should say, then so be it. And I know that there are a lot of people who are completely, incredulous at the fact that the Big Ten is not going to have fans in the stands for our games. But again, I'm just grateful that football is going to be played. And if that means, that Ohio Stadium is going to be relatively vacant, so be it. As long as I get to see Ohio State playing on television, I'll take what I can get.
Yeah, I have no problem with them being cautious. In fact, they should be cautious. If you want normal, then build a time machine and go back or forward in time, maybe, because there's no normal right now. So to get a season, this is, when they started talking about this might happen, and you started to hear rumors that they're going to have a vote on this date or 2 days from now or on this Tuesday or whatever. You started to get a sense that it was going to happen. It was a matter of when. And then when it was announced, you kind of felt like, well, why are they pushing it so far back? Even if they give them 6 weeks, it seemed like they could have started earlier in October than they ended up doing. But whatever, they made their decision. It's done. Games are going to start, not this weekend in the Big Ten, but next weekend as we record this. And, then we'll have an Ohio State season, which is what we wanted all along, and we're going to get that opportunity to see Justin Fields in what will probably be his final collegiate season. You had Wyatt Davis and Shaun Wade opting out at one point and then opting back in, which was really a testament to those guys could go out, and they could have stayed opted out and both continued to be a first-round draft pick. They came back to have a shot at a national championship, to go through this one more time with their brothers, and that's to be commended. And it just kind of shows you that even people with something to lose, this means something to be a player at Ohio State playing for Ryan Day this season.
I completely agree. I think that the culture is very strong. As you said, like the mere opportunity to back out, I don't think, obviously Ohio State fans would be disappointed, but I certainly think that they would understand, anyone in the same situation, the opportunity to kind of secure their financial future might have made that decision. It is a credit to Wyatt Davis, to Shaun Wade, that they came back. Like you said, they see the opportunity to compete for a national championship playing with their brothers. So again, I think it's a testament to the strong culture that Ryan Day and his coaching staff and the players have developed within the program.
What did you make of members of the national media who widely criticized the desire for the Big Ten to play, whether it was Ohio State? Obviously, they wanted to play. They came out and made statements. Ryan Day made a statement. Justin Fields made statements. But it wasn't just Ohio State. I mean, famously, you had statements from Penn State, from Nebraska, from other schools. They all wanted to play, and yet this was framed as Ohio State just wants to come back and win a national championship. It was not framed any other way by certain members of the national media, and to me it was a discredit to journalism, and it was a discredit to those individuals for even spewing that out there.
Well, I think you articulated it very well just right there. It was a discredit to journalism. It was a discredit to those individuals. They have to deal with the consequences of what they wrote, what they argued for, within their respective publications. I guess, it's one of these things where, like you said, I think the national media likes to always have kind of a villain, and Ohio State seems to be, for whatever reason, a very convenient, let's just say a convenient target to identify, in that villain role, like the idea of, like the fans are obnoxious, how, Ohio State's putting the players at risk, whatever kind of rationale that they may have had, they completely ignored and overlooked the fact that, Nebraska also, Penn State also, Iowa also, other schools were also very much involved in trying to get a Big Ten season back on track. I would be remiss if I did not also identify that team up north, for all of the venom that we normally reserve for the end of the season. There was believe it or not, there was a parents' march up in Ann Arbor, protesting the decision as well. So, like you said, it just seems as though Ohio State's a collective. It's a convenient target for the national media to identify. Oh, this is like a win-at-all-cost mentality, when other schools within the Big Ten also wanted to resume football.
And to me, it was extremely disingenuous of members of the media to hold actual credentials two college football games that were on the schedule and coming up, and at the same time denounce Ohio State and the Big Ten for suggesting that they might actually be able to play. There was one individual, I'm not going to say his name, but his name rhymes with Fat Porty, and he had Notre Dame credentials for I think that following week.
Yes, and yeah, he certainly, like you said, a discredit to the publication that he writes for, a discredit to himself. That same individual, you may not be aware, maybe our listeners may not be aware, also has a child who swims, and it seems as though how convenient it was to sit in judgment of Ohio State, like you said, being able to go up to South Bend, attend a game, while saying the Big Ten should not be playing games, and then to be mocking and ridiculing these parents for having these protests, for having these these marches that wanting to resume a college football season, when everyone knows if the situation was reversed and maybe the college swimming season was canceled, that he would probably understand where these parents were coming from. So like you said, I think he completely discredited and embarrassed himself immensely.
Well, Chip, we had a schedule originally. That schedule got scrapped late summer when they announced that they weren't going to be playing any non-conference games, and just went with some just Big Ten games across the board. It was a little bit different than what the schedule we have now. Then they decided to postpone the season until the spring, and then that got wiped out. And when they decided to come back, they of course had to revamp the schedule because everything was condensed. And that original schedule had some built-in bye weeks for multiple teams, so that if there were coronavirus cases, there might be a chance to get some kids back and healthy and getting negative tests and get them through it. And there were opportunities where if there were some cases, you'd have some weeks built in. Now it's just every week and no bye weeks and a shortened season, which is going to, of course, make for some controversy at the end of the year based on different number of games played with other conferences and that kind of thing. What do you make of this whole notion that, it means more to go 9-1 in one conference than 8-0 in another, or whatever?
I don't. That doesn't really hold a lot of water with me. I think the schedules are what those respective conferences were able to accomplish. I mean, in fairness, talking about like the SEC, I know that they've had to juggle, because of the coronavirus, in terms of moving things around. I will say that the Big Ten did themselves no favors whatsoever by their decision. By their decision to cancel the season and then resume, like you said, like they have no wiggle room. Like with the idea of if at a member institution, a bunch of players are, if they test positive for the coronavirus, and I'm sure you are well aware of it, I know our listeners probably are, any individual who tests positive has to sit out for 21 days. That's basically, you're talking 3 weeks. So you're talking, all right, in a shortened schedule, you're looking at, okay, a third of the season. And so I don't really, getting back to your question, I don't really look at it like, okay, well, this team that went 9-1 is better than a team that went 8-0. I don't see it in the same way. I just think that the schedules are what they are. Fortunately for the Big Ten, there are a number of competitive teams besides Ohio State in it. So I think the Big Ten will be looked upon favorably by the College Football Playoff Committee.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, one of the interesting things about the schedule this year is that on the date of the Big Ten championship game, all of the teams are going to play their equivalent in the opposite division. So second place teams will play, third place teams will play, and so on. Wanted to get your thoughts on that, whether it's something that should be done every year, and why is the answer to that last question a resounding yes?
No, I certainly do agree with that. I think if anything, it is only going to amplify the interest throughout the conference. Let's put it that way. I will say, and this is going to sound really harsh, it's going to be interesting to see if the teams that are playing for last place, if they are actually, maybe I'm misunderstanding it. I seem to recall when the season was reinstated, I seem to recall Barry Alvarez watching an interview on Big Ten Network saying the teams will have the opportunity to play. So it kind of makes me wonder, okay, well, the last place team in the East versus the last place team in the West, are they really going to want to play, to see who's the worst? That being said, though, I do think, yes, you're absolutely, I am completely on board with you. It should be a resounding yes, that the Big Ten should look into this going forward. I don't know how, I don't know what kind of challenges that the Big Ten had in coming up with this, but I certainly believe it would be a very worthwhile endeavor. Like I'd be in favor of the sacrifice of a, quote unquote, like non-conference game in favor of this for seeding purposes, like Barry Alvarez said, for the bowls, like knowing, okay, well, this team is second, this team is third, or whatever it might be.
I kind of think that the interesting thing about it is that you could build on this. I think it will build a lot of excitement for that weekend. I think it will be something that the fans would enjoy, but also think it's a great thing for, you could give a divisional trophy out to the teams from the winning, kind of like we have the ACC Big Ten Challenge and kind of things like that in basketball. This could be an opportunity to show one division is dominant over the other, and it might not end up being the one that we think would win it.
That's true. That's true.
Because anything can happen. But let's take a look at that schedule now, Chip. We're, of course, going to have the kickoff of the season on October 24th, Saturday the 24th. The Buckeyes will play Nebraska at home at 12 noon, and that's Big Nude Saturday. And it's going to be the battle of the teams that fought the hardest, or at least the most visibly, to get the season reinstated.
Oh, it's exciting. I do feel for Nebraska genuinely, because I know we're going to talk about Nebraska in greater detail. But I genuinely think that's what a way to start off the season, in terms of two tradition-rich programs, and having Fox made a very wise decision putting that on at noon on a nationally televised audience.
So as I understand it, this is one of the protected cross-divisional games, and that's why Nebraska and Illinois ended up being the teams that Ohio State will play from the Western Division.
Okay. All right.
So then from there, of course, going to Penn State, which is always difficult, but maybe this is a good year to go to Penn State if there's not going to be fans in the stands on Halloween in State College.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head. The fact that going into the 2020 season, I think most Ohio State fans would have said, all right, what's going to be the most difficult game? And obviously before everything happened, the trip out to Oregon that got canceled, loomed large. Well, this game was up there too, because like you said, anytime that Ohio State has to go on the road to Penn State, knowing that they're going into a whiteout is always challenging. The mere fact that fans aren't going to be in the stands. And oh, by the way, considering how big of a game this is for both teams in the context of the divisional race, it would not be surprising if this is another big noon kickoff on Fox. It hasn't been announced yet, but it wouldn't be surprising to me whatsoever.
Yeah, all of the games are to be announced game time-wise, except for the opener on the 24th and the Michigan game on December 12th. Those are both noon kickoffs. The Penn State game, though, it looms large. It's the second game of the season, so a lot of emphasis is going to be put on that early in the year. We've seen some crazy upsets in some of the other conferences. We've seen some pretty insane games, and this is a weird year. Tom Moore has said this repeatedly on Buckeye Weekly and on the Morning Scoop that this is going to be a strange season, and it's going to be hard for anybody to go undefeated. So the winner of this game, on October 31st, huge advantage in the Eastern, the Big East race.
Yes, yeah. This is where, depending on, and I'm starting to agree with some sentiments that, yes, Ohio State should be considered the favorite, but Penn State is well regarded, and depending on how they do the rest of the season, it wouldn't be surprising if they could. I mean, it might be more difficult, but depending on, as you have said, how other teams do within the ACC, within the SEC, the Big 12, the Pac-12 hasn't started yet. It wouldn't be surprising to see if Penn State could possibly get some chatter as a possible playoff team. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it wouldn't be surprising.
Yeah, James Franklin has a very good team, and like I said, going there, even though it's not going to be in front of a whiteout, sold-out crowd at night, still not going to be easy. Going on the road is not an easy thing. We saw, granted, it's a lower, it's not a Power 5 conference. We saw a Tulsa team that had a winning record and 3 games under its belt, went to Houston and lost to a Houston team that hadn't played a game yet. So, anything can happen when you go on the road, especially. But that is a very large game early in the season. The next 2 weeks after that, November 7th and November 14th, seem like they're against two of the bigger opponents to restarting the season, in Rutgers at home on the 7th of November in Columbus, and then at Maryland on November 14th. Is that going to carry over to the game? Is the off-season stuff going to carry over in the game, and Ryan Day is going to put 100 yards or 100 points up on Rutgers?
It's entirely possible. I think both of these games represent opportunities. Let's face it. For I'm always a big advocate of letting the backups get some quality reps, and especially considering the weird nature of 2020, it wouldn't be surprising to me whatsoever that we see a lot of the backups once a commanding lead has been established in both of these contests.
All right, but we could see C.J. Stroud throwing 40-yard bombs rather than handing off repeatedly once it becomes a 5-touchdown game.
Right.
So Rutgers in Maryland, and then Indiana in Columbus on November 21st. Indiana's an improved team. They look pretty strong, but Ohio State will be favored probably by double digits in this one, and you would expect Ohio State to win that. And then the trip to Champaign this year is pushed all the way to November 28th. And if you think that it gets blustery any other time in Illinois, well, November 28th is probably twice as blustery as any other time.
Yeah, Illinois is notorious for wreaking havoc on the passing game, so this game should be interesting. To say this will be one where I will not be surprised if Ohio State tries to just win this in a manner or fashion that Coach Hayes would have approved by keeping it on the ground the majority of the time.
Absolutely. Then it's Sparty in East Lansing, so back-to-back road games at Illinois, at East Lansing. That'll be December 5th, so I can't imagine that the weather's going to be too much better in East Lansing on December 5th than it will be in Illinois, in Champaign, Illinois, November 28th. So I guess what we're saying is that Justin Fields needs to get his numbers up early in the season, because the Illinois and Michigan State game might not be real impressive to the Heisman voters.
No, I highly doubt that. You referenced the blustery conditions of Champaign, and how late the game is, being November 28th. Memory serves. I mean, the last few times that Ohio State has gone up to East Lansing, and again, way before December, that it was cold. It was not necessarily optimal. I can't imagine that on December 5th that the day will dawn and it'll be ideal for throwing the ball around. So yeah, if Justin Fields, if we're looking to pad stats, we're certainly doing it before November 28th and before December 5th.
And then, Chip, the regular season concludes December 12th at noon against that team up north. Go stock up on your kegs and your eggs because you're going to need them early that day. And this is an opportunity for Jim Harbaugh to get off the schneid, to break the streak in a very strange, oddball year where anything can and has happened for Michigan to try to get that win against Ohio State.
Well, the thing is, like you said, it has been such a long, strange year, everything in 2020. If there is a positive that I have about this entire start, stop, restart of the Big Ten, is that the decision makers came to their senses, and instead of having the game on October 24th when it was like readjusted, that they came to their senses and put it back in its rightful place as the final regular season game for both teams. So yeah, stock up on the kegs and eggs because the game, it's pretty much as you said earlier, it's a noon kickoff. It didn't surprise me that it was announced as a noon kickoff. The only thing that surprised me is that it took them so long to announce it when they had the game against Nebraska on October 24th announced well in advance. So happy to see that the game on Fox at 12 p.m. for the Buckeyes against the Wolverines.
Now that's a big nude Saturday, but I don't think you want to be nude running around on December 12th. There could be a foot of snow on the ground.
Could be. It's entirely possible.
And then, as I understand it, the Big Ten championship game is set for the 19th. And that will be, of course, the day that, or at least the weekend that, this whole thing could come about, where all of the Eastern Division and Western Division teams all battle it out, 2 against 2, 3 against 3, and all down the line. And I gotta admit, we talked about it earlier. I think I would watch as many of those games as I could.
Oh, certainly. I just think it's going to be interesting because I may be mistaken. I believe the SEC championship is scheduled for December 19th, and that's usually in the afternoon. But if you're Fox, if you're FS1, if you're Big Ten Network, you have an opportunity to pretty much, monopolize the college football viewing landscape. When you think about it, because it's, I think almost every other conference, they're going to be playing a championship game. Well, the Big Ten is actually going to be playing games. So it'll be, for fans of the other programs that aren't necessarily in the Big Ten championship, like you said, I think it definitely is a great idea that they came up with to have the East versus West way to kind of figure out who's, finishing where in the overall standings.
I wonder how many teams will have an opportunity to become bowl eligible by winning that game.
Very good question, because maybe I'm mistaken. I thought that I saw something where the NCAA is kind of giving a waiver in terms of the win eligibility. But that being said, some teams, they might be looking at, we since we really don't know. That's the thing. The reason why I'm kind of stammering over this, I'll be completely transparent to you and to our listeners, is without spring football and, coming, you're talking near the end of October, we really have no idea what the overall health and fortunes of Big Ten teams are. I freely admit, not that it's a scientific analysis by my side of it, but during the spring is one of these things where when the Big Ten Network says, this team is playing their spring game on this day, not that you can really learn a lot from a spring game, but I do try to catch up and see how other teams, if there are any breakout players or are there any individuals that are catching my eye. I think Ohio State, they recruited that kid, or That's a kid who Ohio State never offered, but he decided to go elsewhere. But he looks like he might, turn into a legitimate prospect. I'm truly flying blind. I think you are too. I think almost everyone is like, we really don't know until October 24th comes around. We have no idea really how the rest of the Big Ten is going to look. If they're anything like the rest of college football, I'm anticipating some sloppiness from any Big Ten team. That's not meant in a condescending manner, but the fact that, okay, they didn't have the spring and they had abbreviated seasons in terms of, abbreviated, I guess you could say, preseason work that probably is impacting the overall caliber of play.
Yeah, I think you're definitely going to see some lack of sharpness, especially at the beginning. I mean, you have to look no further than what's happened so far in the Big 12, the SEC, the ACC. If you've been paying attention to the special teams, especially in those games, it's been pretty dire at times. A lot of penalties, a lot of long touchdown plays because defenses aren't quite ready for certain things. And I mean, we even saw. I don't know how much of this was Ole Miss's revamped offense or whatever, but we even saw Alabama give up 600 plus yards and really get tested by Ole Miss.
Oh yeah, and if there was any regret that I had is that with all I'm happy to see, because Coach Saban has actually been one of the proponents about the importance of wearing a mask, and he was wearing a mask on the sidelines, is that we didn't get to see his traditional volcanic eruption of rage at when his defense would give up a big play. If anything, like all of the profanity that was probably being uttered was, being caught by that mask. So we didn't actually see it on national television like we normally would.
That's right. Oh man. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be, it's going to be interesting to see how well the various teams throughout the Big Ten do in terms of maintaining their protocols, because one of the things that I've long maintained is that these, especially for schools like Ohio State, Penn State, these are schools that legitimately they go into the season thinking we have a real shot to get in the college football playoff, and I think they have. For that reason, I think you may have more to play for. I think you may have, more of a willingness to make sacrifices for that. And as a result, I think that you are probably in a better place. You're spending all your time at the Woody Hayes facility. Maybe take some online classes. You're more likely to follow the protocols than maybe like Tom likes to talk about a Rutgers or a Maryland, who maybe don't have quite as much on the line, and maybe want to partake of some of those traditional college, rites of passage and those kinds of things that really aren't all that safe or smart to partake of right now. So I think the general student body is more at risk than the Ohio State football team, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the year. And to me, the thing was really irritating as I circle back to that earlier conversation we had about shutting down football, is that none of these schools really, or very few of them, were willing to put their money where their mouth is when it came to the student body. So they talk all this stuff about safety. But yet, let's get those dorms filled up, and let's get those let's cash those tuition checks.
Yeah, I mean, as the parent of an Ohio State student, who I genuinely feel for my daughter. I feel for her friends, because they are not being able to, they're not going to be able to attend games, like that. It's trust me when I say, as a parent, actually hearing your daughter say, it's, like she's already kind of looked at the schedule and said, I'm only going to, as an undergraduate, I'm only going to be able to see the Ohio State Michigan game one time, because this year she won't, again, and it's like, and you think like, wow, it's like, you never thought about that way. But getting back to like the credit I would give to, obviously I'm proud of my daughter for many other things beyond just this, but that she is really good at the whole social distancing aspect. Making sure that they don't congregate in large groups, and it's going to be interesting to see if, as the season gets going, if schools are going to, like you said, hold the students accountable. I know Ohio State is doing that. That's one thing that I give credit to. Dr. Johnson, the new Ohio State president, is she not only came in supportive of Big Ten football having the season, but also she's been very adamant about, students, you need to do what's right so we can continue to be on campus and that we can continue to possibly have a season. I certainly hope that the other member institutions of the Big Ten will follow Ohio State's lead in this regard.
All right, I do too, and I think it's an incoming president and an incoming Big Ten commissioner has never had to deal with as much as they have this year. And I know a lot of very awful things were said to Ohio State's new president, and when people didn't have all the facts, and so it was good to see. It was good when that news finally came out that she was supportive of the of what Gene Smith and Ryan Day wanted to do and their wishes and all of that. So people have kind of calmed down over that, but there was some real vitriol spewed over it. So it's good to see that she's bounced back, at least in the public eye from that, and that it's a good example of wait till you have all the facts before you just start screaming online.
I completely agree, and I think she did herself a favor, unlike Kevin Warren. I think Dr. Johnson, she came in, and I'm not saying, necessarily like, oh, follow the crowd per se. I think she looked at all of the options, and I think like any good leader, listened to the people that she not only, that she, I guess you could say that I can't say that she hired, but, people that she has in positions of authority. She had, Gene Smith, and she had Ryan Day, and Ohio State has a first class, medical team that was there giving information, and she weighed all of that, and looked at, okay, this is possible. This is doable. So yeah, I think, like you said a moment ago, Michael, like, let's let the facts come out, before we necessarily make a rush to judgment.
Yeah. So, it was really great that when the information finally surfaced, was Christina Johnson from Ohio State. It was also, I believe, Iowa and Nebraska that had voted to play, and everybody else was nah.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I think so many people forgot the fact that Dr. Johnson was a varsity athlete at Stanford. So she can relate to the experiences of the student athlete. She wasn't necessarily, and it's not meant in a derogatory sense towards the Big Ten presidents who may not have had that kind of experience. But I think, so much of our, of our belief system is, fashioned by our experience. And I think Dr. Johnson had that previous student athlete experience. And I think that, she allowed, as I said a moment ago, she listened to Gene Smith, listened to Ryan Day, listened to the team physicians, and said, this is possible. So yeah, I think, Ohio State is very lucky to have Dr. Johnson, especially I don't envy her coming into such a difficult situation in 2020 and having that vote on her plate right from the onset. But I think she handled it very well.
I agree, and well said, Chip. So one of the things you and I want to do is we want to kind of give our handicapping of the West, the Big Ten West, on this initial podcast as we get our 2020 Silver Bullets podcast season really underway in earnest. So why don't we do that right after this? right, Chip. So you and I have to kind of talk about we're gonna do our Eastern Conference predictions next week, but you and I have to talk about our Western Conference up front, like we did last year. For those of you out there who are new to us here in Buckeye Scoop Land, of course, we used to be over at the Ozone, and we did this last year. We're going to do it again this year. We're going to kind of talk about the teams in the West, and then we'll come back and talk about the teams in the East next week. We'll also have a special guest next week, and we will preview the Nebraska-Ohio State game for the 24th. I can't believe we're already just about ready to do our first look ahead, our game preview of the season. It's kind of crazy. It's to say that on October 12th as we record this, but it should be fun. But let's talk about the West. Last season, in the preseason media poll, Nebraska was predicted to finish first. That didn't happen.
I know.
So I think a lot of people bought into the Scott Frost thing and how he's going to come in and, do what he did at UCF and turn the Cornhuskers around. And so Nebraska got a huge benefit of the doubt in the off season leading up to the 2019 Big Ten season. But Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin was picked to finish third. Then Northwestern, Purdue, Minnesota, and Illinois. And I tell you, Minnesota and Illinois made a lot of people look silly last year.
They did, and I freely admit that I bought into the Nebraska hype last year. Guilty as charged. I really thought all of the success that Scott Frost had previously, and the recruiting successes that Scott Frost had at Nebraska led me to believe that maybe he'll in year two have them. So that was obviously, erroneous and premature in making that. Getting back to Illinois, freely admit that one. I think almost anybody who would look at that, team and I'm not going to be as critical because Illinois was one of those teams that, we were all looking for a coaching change more than likely at the end of the 2019 season. Based on, just conventional wisdom. So Illinois certainly made like you said, the prognosticators look foolish. And getting to Minnesota, the whole PJ Fleck, kind of that, I will say that I had often kind of regarded him as kind of like a snake oil salesman type, like a lot more sizzle than substance, but he's certainly proven to with the results at what he did at Western Michigan as well as at Minnesota that he is building something very impressive there up in Minnesota.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing you use that word before, the snake oil salesman analogy, and I do remember we talked last year about Lovie Smith probably wasn't going to make it beyond the season. But the Illinois with that huge upset against Wisconsin kind of got their season really jump started and had a good year for a program that's been down for quite a while. Obviously, Illinois has had much better years than that. They've won Rose Bowls. They've gone to Rose Bowls, and they were, I guess, a maybe average team last year, which is a huge step forward for them.
Yes.
Minnesota was a team that I thought might be still building. I wasn't necessarily sold or unsold on PJ Fleck. I just thought it would take more time. He obviously got his team to buy into what he wants them to do. They executed very well. They had some very good breakout seasons by some players there, and they were a factor in that race. I believe when you picked Nebraska, I think, to win the West last year, I think my prediction was Iowa, if I recall correctly.
I think you're right.
Who knows? That was like a whole nother website we were podcasting for back then. 2019 was about 132 years ago. So,
Feels like it.
It's hard to remember that far back. But I mean, somebody wants to write in and confirm or tell me I was wrong. That's fine. I won't even check. I'll just believe you. You could tell me I picked Northwestern for all I know. So I don't know how the best way to do this is, but maybe give me your. I think maybe we'll do it this way. Give me your top 2 finishers in the West, and we'll kind of just go from there.
Okay. So before I give you my top 2, and here's where, again, this is, I want to emphasize the unscientific approach that I have usually when it comes to, and this is like during the best of, like the regular, college football season is, during the summer when getting the college football magazines. And like I said, having seen some of the spring football on Big Ten Network, kind of looking at, okay, well, how does this, like, when do these teams have their, buys, and when do they go on the road, and who's coming back, and who did they lose, and that kind of, like to kind of help gauge that. So now since all that got thrown out the window, right?
Yep.
I'm gonna say that, and here's where I'll give you my top 2 up until probably like a week, maybe less than ago. I probably was leaning towards Wisconsin, but the loss of starting quarterback Jack Cohn to injury has made me pull away from Wisconsin. Even I think Wisconsin, don't get me wrong, you can't help but have respect for a program like that. Paul Chryst, year in, year out, say what you will about, like how, like they have a big offensive line and they find some obscure running back from somewhere. It's a proven formula. That being the case, I'm not going to pick Wisconsin. I think they will finish in the top 2. I'm going to go with PJ Fleck in the Minnesota Golden Gophers as my top team in the West. They are, and I'll give you, and since we were talking earlier about like this, the schedule being announced, at least for Ohio State, with we already knew that the Nebraska game, Minnesota is the Friday favorite of of the networks. I mean, they have 3 announced Friday night games, and when we look at, I think the fact that they actually get, by and large, like they get Iowa at home on a Friday night on November 13th. That should bear watching. Friday the 13th, Minnesota, Iowa. They do have to go to Wisconsin on November 28th, so that'll be a big game. They finish up the season on the road at Nebraska. But I like the fact they get the Wolverines to start the season, at home on a Saturday night game.
Big game right there.
Yeah. Oh, that right there is I think, going to set the tenor for both teams. I mean, I know we're going to talk about the East next week, but I really do think, like Minnesota, they've got a lot of talent coming back. I like the fact that Rashad Bateman, he had originally declared for the NFL, but he's coming back. Tanner Morgan back. They do, in terms of like they had some key losses. A mutual favorite of you and I, Antoine Winfield Jr. is off to the NFL and doing well.
He is.
But I'm going to go with Minnesota winning the West with Wisconsin finishing second. And I think Iowa and Nebraska, I think Iowa had a somewhat tumultuous offseason. I think that they'll finish third. I think Nebraska, they're really – I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but, man, the Big Ten schedule makers did not do them any favors, with not only starting them off with Ohio State, but they play Wisconsin in week 2. They have Penn State week 4. I mean, they still have to play, like at Northwestern. They still have to play Minnesota, all Iowa. I think Nebraska's going to have a rough year, but I'll go Minnesota 1, Wisconsin 2.
All right, so look at you. You're buying into the snake oil sales.
I am. Miracle cures.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm a little surprised at the number of players who opted out before the season was canceled that decided to come back. That caught me a little bit off guard. I thought once you've made that decision, regardless of whether there's a season, that decision's made. Like we see with Micah Parsons
Yeah.
from Penn State. But it actually, I'm surprised. Rondale Moore, at Purdue, and Rashad Bateman, as you said, these are guys who opted out fairly early and decided to come back anyway. And I think that they could improve their draft stock. Probably Rashad Bateman could improve his maybe a little more than Rondale Moore. I think Rondale Moore is extremely highly thought of by scouts and the NFL. But yeah, I think that that's a big, huge factor for the Minnesota Golden Gophers having Rashad Bateman back. And I agree that I think Minnesota takes that next step and gets to that top of the heap in the West this year. And I have to say that I also agree with your second place team, because even with Jack Cohn going down with an injury, Wisconsin seems to have a Jack Cohn every year. They seem to have a guy like that every single year, with the exception of the year that they got Russell Wilson to transfer in. I think they never seem to really have a completely dynamic quarterback. They just have a guy who goes in and he's tough and he makes throws and he hits his tight ends and he hits his running backs, and they always have a good running game. They're very good at holding people so that they can't get to the quarterback or tackle their running backs. So yeah, I think Wisconsin finishes second as well. You've already tipped your hand a little bit at your next couple, but I think now I'm gonna change gears on you and ask you who finishes dead last in the West.
Ooh, okay. Dead last. It's going to hurt me to say this because, I have a lot of respect for Pat Fitzgerald, but I just think, last year Northwestern, I beg your pardon, Northwestern offensively was so wretchedly bad. And I'm basing this, again, on the fact that with no spring ball, and I just think that, I don't know. I know that there's a lot of, I know that he turned over his offensive coaching staff, and rightfully so. I'm going to go with Northwestern finishing last. That's just, I hope I'm wrong, because that would be the kind of thing where, like, people at Northwestern would foolishly say, oh, we got to get rid of Pat Fitzgerald or something like that, and that would be a horrible mistake. I just think Northwestern, in terms of offensively, I don't see them being able to keep pace with the other teams in the Big Ten West.
Yeah, I think once again I'm going to agree with you. I think this is really boring and dull podcasting. But I'm going to agree with you. I think Northwestern pulls up the rear again. The key factor for me is, however, for Northwestern is that how weird this year has been, and the fact that Pat Fitzgerald's teams generally play very, very hard. They could surprise some people, but I just don't see the talent level at Northwestern the way we've seen it in years past. You don't see anybody that makes you go, I'm afraid of that guy, or that guy concerns me when you're going to play them. And I just think this is maybe the most nondescript Northwestern team of all time.
Yeah. One saving grace, if there will be, for Northwestern, and I don't want to put this all on one player because it's not fair. Northwestern is going to get Indiana transfer quarterback Peyton Ramsey, who, again, he's not a world beater by any, in terms of his ability, but he's one of those guys who's kind of like described as kind of like a coach on the field type, again, in terms of like his playing style. So that will help the quarterback position immensely, how bad they were, in so many ways. Like you said, it's like Northwestern, when they have been good, it's usually been as a result of, just playing, really, like tough as nails defense and ball control. And, the fact that last year they had really no semblance of an offense, I think that's what really did them in. And again, 2020, if there's anything, is the one consistent thing about 2020 is how inconsistent all across the spectrum, everything is, look at, it wouldn't be surprising at all. Like come December, we were kind of looking back like, remember when we picked Northwestern to finish dead last and they're in the Big Ten championship game? So it's just one of those things where I have too much respect for Pat Fitzgerald as a coach. But I just think offensively that loss of spring, the inconsistent summer, as well as, like a new offensive coaching staff, I just don't have too much faith in Northwestern to be able to improve that much. And that's why I picked them to finish last in the Big Ten West.
Yeah, and as you said, weird things happen, and this team does usually have Pat Fitzgerald's personality. They play with his personality usually. So, I mean, this is a team that could finish, in my opinion, they could finish as high as third in the West. Or at the very bottom, like where we picked them. So it will be fun and interesting to see how that plays out over the course of the 2020 season. And of course, the great unknown and the great equalizer will be which teams avoid the virus and which teams avoid key guys getting it if they do have an outbreak. So Northwestern's one of those teams where if you 2 or 3 key guys get it, I mean, it could be just a really, really ugly season. Because as you mentioned, it's 21 days. It's 14 days till they can resume training, and then the mandate is that you have to have a week's worth of training to get back on the field. So, it is what it is. And if you can avoid it, and other teams in your division can't, I mean that could boost your finish by 2 or 3 places at least. Yeah,
it's going to be incumbent upon all the teams in the conference to do the right thing. And, so far, so good. I'm certainly very proud of, what I've seen and read online about Ohio State. I can only hope that the rest of the Big Ten kind of has a same disciplined approach towards doing the right thing so the season can be played in its entirety. Because like we said earlier, there's no wiggle room. It's pretty much starting October 24th until December 19th, games every week, and if somebody gets sick, I mean you're out for 21 days. So not a lot of negotiation there.
Sorry about that. I was muted. I was the guy on the Zoom call that didn't hit mute.
That's okay. That's okay.
All right, Chip, give me your number 3 team. You touched on it already. Lock in your number 3 team in the West.
I'm gonna go with Iowa, even though I do believe that they had a tumultuous offseason. I'm something about Kirk Ferentz. I think he'll be able to, by if not at the beginning of the season, by the end of the season, I think he'll have Iowa playing well.
Yeah, that's Iowa is certainly a team that you can never count out to even win the West. Kirk Ferentz just does Kirk Ferentz things, and they always have good tight ends. They always have that same. Again, they're a little bit like Wisconsin. They always find that quarterback who's almost the same as the last quarterback they had. They always have a pretty decent running game, at least usually one really talented wide receiver, but all kinds of good tight ends. And they play good defense. They play well at home. But, of course, if there's not going to be any fans in the stands, maybe that won't be as big a factor this year. But as much as I hate to say it, I'm going to, again, agree with you because it's bad podcasting for us to agree so much. But I am, again, on the same page as you in putting Iowa third in my Western Conference predictions.
Okay. So I will tell you that just to kind of give you an idea, I think Purdue will bounce back from a rough 2019. Not enough to win the Big Ten West. But I think, if there is a saving grace that Purdue has is that, when you look at, their crossover teams, for, who they play, within, like the Big Ten East, they get Rutgers and they play their traditional rival Indiana. That's not a bad lot in life to have. It's like, so it just really remains to be seen how they do, because like they were bit really hard by the injury bug last year and poor play. But I'm going to go with Purdue 4th.
Purdue at the 4 spot. All right. I'm going to lock it in. So you're now Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Purdue. I'm going to go away from you here.
Okay.
And I'm going to say there's probably a lot that goes into this for me in terms of, they have a tough cross divisional schedule, but I think that this is a team. I'll tell you who it is in a minute. I think this is a team that came together in the offseason more than a lot of people think. And of course, I'm reading into this from somebody that wasn't in the locker room, that, wasn't around, and is only going by media stories and that kind of thing. But I'm going to say that this offseason was a bonding experience for Nebraska. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go ahead and say that they play over their heads this year and finish in that 4th spot.
No, I like it. I thought about Nebraska. Like the fact, I actually have them. I have them 5th, for what it's worth. I strongly consider it was what the deciding factors for me was not only like the tough division games, but the fact that they do go on the road and play at Ohio State, not only in the onset, but then November 14th they welcome in Penn State. That's kind of what led me to marking them 5th. Also the fact, offensively, I think they're still trying to find their way. Like the fact that they lost J.D. Spielman in the offseason, played a factor. I think, if anything, this is a critical year. I know we're going to talk next week about Nebraska in greater detail. I think it's going to be a critical year for Adrian Martinez at quarterback for Nebraska, because, by and large, like he's been such a big part of that offense. I think for him to take a major step forward to help get Nebraska over the hump, it'll be really big. So I'm slotting Nebraska 5th in the Big Ten West.
Gotcha. Now I will go. You've put Purdue at 4th. I'm going to put Purdue at 5th. And it's hard for me to do this because it's a team that I think just like you mentioned, they have easy crossover games, and Rondale Moore is such a once a generation type talent for that program to get. I think that's just going to be a matter of them staying healthy and being able to replicate what they did the year before last. So they could very easily finish higher than 5th. And I may be reading too much into the Nebraska bonding in the offseason kind of thing over wanting to play and the whole let us play movement. So that could blow up in my face. And I could easily see Nebraska finishing last in the West as much as I could see them finishing 4th. But I'm going to stick to my guns because we have to be different somewhere, damn it.
Oh, yeah.
Which means that we both have Illinois slotted 6th. Illinois,
yes.
as I mentioned earlier, they really turned in a surprising performance last year. They're not going to be able to sneak up on anybody this year. They lost their top 2 running backs. I don't even know what else they have coming back of good quality or what their I didn't hear a lot about their recruiting class in the offseason. So I don't know what Lovie Smith has, but he's going to have to work some magic to get even what he got out of his team last year.
Yeah, and the Big Ten certainly did not do them any favors because one of the games, the very first game, as a matter of fact, that Illinois has, it's a Friday. It's actually going to be like the kickoff game for the Big Ten on November 23rd on a Friday night. They actually go to Wisconsin. The reason why I'm bringing that, to our listeners' attention is in case they forgot. That was one of those sneak up games that Illinois had last year. They beat Wisconsin, by 1 point, that nobody saw that coming. I mean, it was a major upset. It was obviously instrumental in Illinois getting to, bowl eligibility. I think Wisconsin will be more than ready for Lovie Smith and the Fighting Illini on Friday night of October 23rd. So, that's how they start out the season. And then, we were just talking about Purdue. they play Minnesota in the third week of the season. We already know that they play Ohio State. It just looks like it's a rough schedule. Like within not only the Big Ten West, if they catch a break, is that they actually go to Rutgers in the middle of November. But it's like you said, I mean, they have Brandon Peters back at quarterback. But that was not a team that really scared a lot of people offensively. Lovie Smith kind of earned his reputation as being more of a defensive coach. Like you said, kind of knowing, like who do they have coming back, on that side of the ball. They didn't have any spring ball. It's going to be, I think it'll be a tough year for Illinois, but even so, I like what they have in comparison. Like it was a tough call between keeping Illinois out of the basement instead of Northwestern. But like I said, going back to that, I thought Northwestern's struggles offensively were even more profound than anything Illinois may have.
Yeah, I think Illinois had something like 6 return touchdowns on defense last year, fumble recoveries or interceptions. It seemed like they were having one every week there for a while, for like a 4 or 5 week span. It seemed like they had one every week. They were running the ball well. They weren't necessarily throwing all over everybody, but like I said, they lost their top 2 running backs. Both were seniors last year, and I don't expect the same level of success because I think other teams have gotten better than in a greater magnitude than Illinois has, and I think that Illinois isn't going to sneak up on anybody last year, and I think that they really kind of did that. Even after beating Wisconsin, I think a lot of people looked at that as a fluke and just said, okay, it's Illinois. And rather than really take them seriously. So I really I respect what Lovie did last year, but I think he's going to have a harder time doing that this year.
Yeah, and just looking at the adjusted schedule, we were joking about, okay, like the last place team, of the conference, it might be, like that last game of the season for Illinois is at Northwestern. So this is probably going to determine, who gets that dreaded 7th spot. As like you said, I don't think Illinois is going to be sneaking up on anybody. Certainly not Wisconsin in week 1 on that Friday night, October 23rd.
And they don't get to pad their schedule with Akron and Connecticut this year.
Right.
They did lose a close game to Eastern Michigan, lost a close game to Nebraska. Got absolutely pounded by Minnesota. They kind of hung around a little bit with Michigan for a while. They beat Wisconsin. They beat on a really banged-up Purdue team. Beat up Rutgers. They narrowly won at East Lansing against a Michigan State team that was certainly the worst one we've seen in years. They end up changing coaches. Then they lost to Iowa, lost to Northwestern, not a very good Northwestern team, and lost their bowl game to California. And all of those were, Iowa was a 9-point game, but they were all multiple scores, and 2 of them were double digits. So I think that was the beginning of the end for Lovie right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I seem to recall that Lovie Smith made the conscientious effort of really going with like a full youth movement. You know what I mean? Like in terms of when he came in, and it seemed as though like they had been pointing towards, like this year, you know what I mean? Like the idea of like 2020 is like, okay, like these guys will be juniors and seniors, and then no spring ball. Obviously, like every team, like you lose players, to graduation in the NFL, and I think you hit it right on the head, like the fact that last year they were barely bowl eligible, and that was with playing Akron, UConn. They lost to Eastern Michigan. You know what I mean? Like they don't have those extra games to kind of, like originally, like just looking at what the schedule should have been, if everything was normal, like Illinois State, Connecticut, and Bowling Green were right there, right? You're talking, that's probably another 3 wins that they don't have. Like that's adding in that growth and development movement that they don't have. So I think Illinois will have a rough year, not as rough as Northwestern, though.
All right, so let's review our Western Conference, our Western Division picks in the Big Ten. Both of us have Minnesota at 1, Wisconsin 2, Iowa 3. Then you have Purdue 4, and I have Nebraska 4. You have Nebraska 5. I have Purdue 5. Then we both have Illinois at 6 and Northwestern at 7. Who in your bottom 3 could be a shocking West Division winner?
I'm going to go with Northwestern just because of the fact of the absurdity of it all. No, like looking at Northwestern's schedule is if there is a benefit to their schedule, and I'm just looking at it cheating here, is that, again, it's like things, got completely upended, is, they get Maryland and they get Michigan State, so 2 teams from the East that aren't, they're not really, teams that are, considered threats to win the Big Ten East. They also, the fact that when they do play, for example, Wisconsin, like they get Wisconsin at home. They get Nebraska at home. They do have to go on the road to Minnesota, which is not going to be easy, especially because it's we're going into, right now in October, while like the season will end in December, you're starting to go into what will be cold weather. I can only imagine what it'll be like in Minnesota in December. That's not an enviable trip. But if there's I have that much faith in Pat Fitzgerald as a coach that for him to be able to right the wrongs, maybe not offensively, but get that team back to playing competitive football, it would not be my surprise, like, completely rational for 2020 pick is that Northwestern winning the Big Ten West. Like I joked about it earlier, but that's why I'm going to go with them.
In my bottom 3, the most likely team to win the West would be Purdue, I think. Although I don't know if their defense is going to be significantly better than last year. They allowed 31 points a game. They were just not very good defensively at all. And this is a team that their offense is pretty good, especially with a healthy Rondale Moore. But you can't expect to give up, 30 points a game and win many of those. I mean, it can be done, but it's not the road to success that you would normally see.
No, when it comes to Purdue, it's never been, I think you would agree, scoring points has never been the issue. Now, last year it was, but in terms of, like they had all those injuries and, like you said, Rondale Moore back. Purdue did hire a brand new defensive coordinator, so remains to be seen, like how much of an impact Bob Diaco can have on that unit. What kind of talent they have back. I know that a defensive end or George or Karlaftis is a sophomore who was well regarded. He had a good freshman year, so if he can make some major strides his sophomore year, maybe apply that outside pressure and on the opposing team's passing game, as a defensive end, maybe that'll make the difference for Purdue.
I mean, even with the injuries they had last year, they really only had 3 poor offensive outputs last year. They only scored 13 on TCU in a 34-13 loss, and Purdue started 1-4, so they were, they really kind of fell off the table right off the bat. But they were scoring points. They just didn't score any against TCU, Penn State on the road, number 9 Penn State. They lost 35-7. And Illinois beat them 24-6. But other than that, they scored 31 in a 34-31 loss at Nevada. They scored 42 to beat Vanderbilt easily. They scored 31 against Minnesota, but lost that game by a touchdown. They put 40 up on Maryland. They lost 26-20 to Iowa, another close game, and that was again on the road. They put 31 up on Nebraska to beat them. They beat Northwestern on the road 24-22. They scored 24 at Wisconsin, but got beat by 3 touchdowns. And then they put up 41 on Indiana and still lost that game by a field goal at home. So Purdue, even last year with a lot of injuries and some guys out, put points on the board all but 3 times last year. And I would expect with Rondale Moore healthy, if he can stay on the field all year, those numbers are only going to go up against most of those teams that they'll play.
Yeah, and a name to remember beyond Rondale Moore, a wide receiver by the name of David Bell, who's a sophomore. And David Bell, you and I, we don't fancy ourselves as being like the recruiting guys on the staff for the Buckeye Scoop. But David Bell was a guy that Ohio State was interested in. He chose Purdue. He's one of these guys that will certainly probably be targeted by Purdue. I don't believe Purdue has announced who their starting quarter. I think it's still like being deliberated and battled in West Lafayette. But no matter who the starter is at quarterback, like we said, Rondale Moore coming back gives that team a tremendous amount of explosiveness. But David Bell is a rising star at the other wide receiver position.
Yeah, it's and it's a good offensive system. They have they have playmakers. They're going to make some plays, and it's just really comes down to do they get a quarterback that takes care of the ball, and can they do anything better defensively? Because Purdue, like I said, I could see them winning the West, and I could see them even finishing last in the West. I mean, that's right. Kind of. I mean, they have really a high ceiling and a really low basement, whereas an Iowa team, the ceiling's not much higher than their basement.
Very good point.
So you think that, and I think, because I said it, Minnesota is getting to the Big Ten title game, and we'll talk next week about the Eastern Division to see who is going to come out of that. But I will ask you this, and regardless, it doesn't matter, East, West, whatever. What do you see as the game of the year in the Big Ten this year?
Oh, wow. We'll put it this way. Obviously, I'm always going to say the game. I'm biased. But I guess if I had to, like when I look at it now, based on what we've been talking about, in terms of where it stands on the Big Ten West. I think I know the question is for the overall conference. I'm going to stick with the Ohio State Michigan games always, but I'm going to go with on November 28th. I'm going to go with Minnesota and Wisconsin simply because I think that is going to be. Here we go. This is going to determine who's going to win the West Division. I guess a very close second. In terms of. Or I shouldn't say second. I would say a close third is going to be when Penn State on the same day, ironically, when Penn State goes to Michigan on November 28th. Just because I think that's going to have a major consequences on like the final standings in the Big Ten East. But to answer I'll say that Minnesota Wisconsin game November 28th looms large.
Okay, and I want to make it clear I wasn't talking about what is the game you're looking forward to most or that you care the most about.
Sure.
It's just game of the year might be a completely different animal. Obviously, you and I are both in agreement that the greatest rivalry in sport is the final game of the year when Ohio State takes on Michigan every year. And I agree to some degree with your assessment of Minnesota, Wisconsin being game of the year. I think that's second for me. I think that the game of the year will be in week 2 when the Buckeyes go to Happy Valley.
I think you're right. I think that will have certainly like at the onset of the season, we're going to be able to tell, okay, this is, kind of how the Big Ten East is going to shape up, like based on the results of that one.
All right, Chip. Well, you and I have managed to get through our first podcast of what we consider the season, our Western Division preview, a Big Ten West preview. We'll be back next week to do the Big Ten East and also to get ready for Ohio State against the Nebraska Cornhuskers. It's all happening as of now. Of course, it's 2020, so wait 5 minutes and things could change. But very excited to see where this is going. I mean, I've been watching college football, watched a ton of games this past week, watched that massive 4 overtime extravaganza and I also watched not only Oklahoma and Texas, but also watched Texas A&M against Florida. I watched, of course, a lot of that Alabama-Mississippi game and a couple others. But it's good to be in this time of year where we have, you have the remote in your hand. So the second you have an injury or a commercial, you're clicking over to see you're hitting that previous button to go back to the last game you were watching, and then sometimes you get sucked in and forget to go back to the other one. So it's a great time of year. Looking forward to it, and it's great that we're here on Buckeye Scoop and part of their network. It's great that they invited us along because they certainly didn't have to do that. So maybe they saw something in us. Hopefully, we can deliver whatever that something is. I don't know. Maybe we're just a big tax write-off for Buckeye Scoop because they're taking over the world.
There you go. That's what a big tax write-off. It's like the corporate mastermind Tony Gerdeman. That's exactly how he thinks of us.
Exactly.
But yeah, you're right. It's great to be talking football with you as always, but especially as it gets closer and closer to Ohio State and the Big Ten. Looking forward to this weekend. Obviously games throughout the day, but the one that kind of is the one that I'm going to be certainly looking forward to the most on Saturday is when Georgia goes to Alabama on Saturday night to see Kirby Smart against Nick Saban, to see, this might be a preview of the SEC championship game. The fact that, this is a great marquee game. So we'll see if Alabama has figured out their defensive woes. We'll see if Georgia can actually play with intensity for 60 minutes. But it is nice to be able to watch these other games, like you said.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that game to find out if Alabama's defense is just that bad or if Ole Miss was a bad matchup for them. Because it's like, you used to see this with Ohio State's defense where they weren't real good against the spread teams, but against Iowa and Wisconsin, that was like the perfect offense for what they were set up to do defensively. So it might be a fact that even if Georgia's a very good team, they just might be a better matchup for Alabama than Ole Miss was. But we'll find that out on the football field, I guess. I can guarantee you those defensive coaches in Tuscaloosa and those defensive players, they will not have an easy week this week.
No. The wrath of Nick Saban is probably being felt many miles away, and it certainly is going to be interesting to see on Saturday night if lessons have been learned.
All right, Chip. So one of the things we want people to do this year, first of all, Chip, are people that read Buckeye Scoop, are they called scoopers? Do we have a nickname officially for them?
That's a good question. We have to reach out to Tom Orr, ask them, Tom Orr and Gerd to see if that is an appropriate term.
All right. Well, I'm going to use it as a placeholder for now, and if there's a more appropriate term, then we'll use that later. But so what we want from the scoopers is we would like you to ask us, whatever's on your mind about Ohio State football. You can ask us your questions over the course of the week. We'll read them on the air and answer them. And you can do that on Twitter is probably the best way to do that. Or, Chip, if you want to do it or I can do it, we can create a questions thread at Buckeye Scoop. And that's something that another place that maybe people can go and ask us questions for Silver Bullets podcast. Where can folks find you on Twitter?
On Twitter, I can be found at Chip Minnick. My last name is spelled Minnich. Like Michael said, it's a privilege to be associated with Buckeye Scoop. I also have the opportunity to write for Athlon. So looking forward to hearing questions from any and all of you about certain topics that you want us to cover here on our podcast.
All right, I will have to I have to have that conversation with Tony Gerdeman about whether the grumpy old Buckeye is making the move as well over to Buckeye Scoop. Our last conversation was it was looking likely. So but at that point it was so far off in the distance that we didn't speak anything more of it. Now we actually have to say, oh wow, this thing's going to happen. So we have to finalize plans. But you can find me on Twitter at Mike36Fan. It's Mike like any other Mike. 36 as in Chris Spielman, and Fan Fan. So at Mike36Fan or at Chip Minnick. You can ask us anything you want, and we will answer it on the next Silver Bullets podcast. Or look for a thread to pop up on the, over at Buckeye Scoop. And actually, I have not started a thread on Buckeye Scoop yet, so I'm gonna have to learn how to do that. I have to go and actually try to do that.
Okay.
So, but I think we can figure it out.
It can't be too tough. Yeah, I'm sure we can.
Yeah, I mean, other people are doing it, so we should be able to do it.
There you go. Absolutely.
That's a ringing endorsement right there.
There you go. Anybody can do it.
That's right. All right, guys. That's going to do it for this edition of the Silver Bullets podcast. Very good talking to you again, Chip, about Buckeye football. We are going to be weekly through the season and until whenever Ohio State is eliminated, and then the week after that will be our season wrap-up show. And after that, we'll have some discussions. We have to kind of nail down our schedule and what we're going to be bringing forth. I think in the past we've done like a couple shows in the off season, spring game preview, spring game sort of recap, and then just shows whenever some news happened. And I think we probably, now that we're working for a more professional organization like Buckeye Scoop, we should probably go ahead and cement what our schedule is going to be, and that way people will always know when and where they can find us. But the best thing you can do is go ahead and subscribe, because our podcast is going to drop on Buckeye Scoop on Wednesday afternoons. But if you subscribe, you'll get the podcast earlier, because we record on Mondays, and believe those are going to go live on our out through Spreaker on basically at midnight Monday nights. So whatever podcast catcher you use, go ahead and subscribe, and you'll get yourself some Silver Bullets podcast in your phone or other device, before people that have to go and get it off Buckeye Scoop.
There you go.
All right, Chip, we're going to come back next week. We have a special guest to preview Nebraska with us, and we are going to do our East preview, and we're going to, of course, put our money where our mouths are and make our predictions, and we'll see what we think of the East, and then, maybe we'll even talk a little bit about some predictions, some bold predictions for maybe end of season awards or something. You and I will talk during the week, and we'll hash that out. This is bad podcasting right here.
Not a problem.
All right.
Like I said, looking for sloppy football in the beginning of the season. We should be allowed some sloppy podcasting as we begin the season. So
it's preseason for everyone, Chip.
Yes.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Silver Bullets podcast. We will be back next week. So we'll sign off the way we always do here at Silver Bullets by saying, "Go Bucks!"
Go Bucks!